Discover the amazing hidden practices that shaped the life of history's most dangerous empress. Emily Johnson stood in the dim attic of her childhood home, her heart racing as she thumbed through the old letters and documents. Each faded envelope felt like a heartbeat, pulsing with secrets, long-buried secrets that belonged to her great-grandmother, an empress in a long-forgotten empire. The thrill of discovery wrapped around her like a warm embrace, igniting a passion that had flickered dimly in the shadows of her academic career. But this exhilarating moment quickly twisted into a knot of anxiety as memories of her colleagues' doubts echoed in her mind. "It's merely sentiment," they would scoff. Emily's ideas, so often dismissed, felt like fragile glass, the slightest touch could shatter them. As leaves tumbled gently outside, their crisp crunch punctuating the otherwise quiet atmosphere, Emily grappled with her ambition. The looming specter of tenure hung over her like a storm cloud, its weight pressing down. She recalled her family's small bookselling business, the hard work they poured into it day after day. Their support was unwavering, yet she could almost hear their voices whispering, "Don't get lost in the world of academia, Emily. Remember where you come from." Torn between two worlds, she felt utterly isolated, her thoughts racing like autumn winds through bare trees. Just as she sifted through the letters with a sense of renewed purpose, she hesitated. The chance to write about her great-grandmother's revolutionary life loomed like a beacon, yet she couldn't escape the gnawing doubt about her credentials. What if they were right, she mused, imagining the whispers in the faculty lounge. Does the family connection enhance or undermine her credibility? She felt the tension inside her coil tighter, a cacophony of conflict, self-doubt warring with determination. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The pressure swelled as her thoughts turned chaotic. Would succeeding mean betraying her origins? Competition within her department added to the turmoil. The influential professors scoffed at her passion, their disdain palpable like ice in the air. She felt the fear crawl up her spine, a visceral reminder of the stakes: tenure, respect, her family's legacy. Each question that crossed her mind pulled harder at her spirit. Is my voice worth hearing? Am I destined to remain an outsider? Taking a deep breath, Emily's thoughts spiraled around her greatest fear: what if she had to choose? The opportunity for publication loomed tantalizingly close, yet something whispered to her, urging her to pause. Could she find a way to honor her family and her ambition? And as she prepared to confront her colleagues in the faculty meeting, an unexpected challenge from Professor Thomas sent her heart plummeting. The tension in that moment crackled like static electricity, leaving her fate hanging precariously in the balance. What would she do when faced with the harsh reality of a critical moment? Emily's fingers trembled as she put down the last letter, the contents swirling in her mind like autumn leaves in a gust. Decisions loomed over her, a field of options stretching beyond her vision, but each cut from the same cloth of doubt. She was poised for a confrontation, not just with her colleagues but with herself. The faculty meeting buzzed around her like a swarm of bees, each voice a reminder of the expectations she felt suffocating her. She had rehearsed her arguments, practicing gestures in the mirror, bracing against imagined snickers about her passion for history being tied to sentimentality. Yet, walking into the conference room, she didn't feel the calm that she'd hoped for. Instead, the words of her family haunted her, their belief that academia would distance her from her roots pressing heavily on her shoulders. As she took her seat, Emily's gaze flicked to the other professors, their faces a mosaic of skepticism. Professor Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. The unspoken question hung in the air: did she belong here? It was a question she had been asking herself for far too long. The meeting commenced, and one after another, her peers presented papers, their voices unwavering, a rhythm she wished to imitate. When her turn came, she flicked through her notes a visual map of her research intertwining her great-grandmother's life with wider historical narratives. The spotlight felt searing, each furrowed brow intensifying her anxiety. She took a deep breath, aligning her intention with the purpose she had found in the attic. "Today I'd like to discuss the impact of my great-grandmother's leadership," she started, her voice steadier than she felt. As she recounted stories of courage, of reformations that rippled through her great-grandmother's society, Emily noticed subtle shifts in her audience. Some leaned in, intrigued. They were reacting. But then came the storm. Professor Thomas interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, you're proposing that a familial connection qualifies you to analyze such a complex figure?" He chuckled, throwing the room into a wave of derisive laughter. The sting of derision prickled her skin, and the bubble of purpose that had begun to take shape inside her popped. It was more than embarrassment, it was a reckoning. Yet, in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't simply about her family legacy. It was about carving out her intellectual space amidst the doubt. "I understand the skepticism," Emily countered, her resolve hardening. "But what better way to explore my great-grandmother's life than through the lens of someone who has inherited not just her lineage but also her aspirations? My distance from the events only fuels my research." The room fell silent. For the first time that day, she was no longer an outsider. She was a conduit of forgotten narratives, her pedigree an asset rather than a burden. Emily's heart raced with an adrenaline rush that dulled the sting of the laughter. The words flowed freely now, reflections of a burgeoning identity merging history with personal story. She was building a bridge, a foundation where history's dangerous empress could not only be understood but revered. As the meeting adjourned and colleagues shuffled out, Emily felt buoyant yet vulnerable. Would her assertiveness withstand the caustic opinions swirling behind closed doors? A sense of uncertainty hung in the air like a thick mist. While she had affirmed her authority, she understood the risk of pushing forward. She left the conference room, mind still racing, contemplating her next moves. Empowered but wary, she knew the path ahead was fraught with challenges. How could she channel this experience into something greater? How far was she willing to go to protect her vision while pursuing recognition? Determinedly, Emily started to piece together the semblance of a plan when her phone buzzed. A message from the archives where she had culled her great-grandmother's letters. They had discovered something new, documents that could change everything. Her heart raced again, not only with anticipation but with the fear of how this discovery could shift her already precarious position in academia. As she stepped outside, the crisp autumn air filled her lungs, each breath igniting the spark of her ambition. The moment had come, but unforeseen secrets awaited. What would they reveal about her great-grandmother, and what true impact could this have on her own journey? Emily stood at the edge of the campus, her phone vibrating in her palm, and suddenly felt the gravity of her choices weighing heavily once more. She had come so far, yet the stakes felt higher than ever. The new documents promised revelations about her great-grandmother, their potential to reshape understanding within the academic world, an exhilarating prospect that also coerced her into an uneasy alliance with fear. She stepped into her car, allowing the hum of the engine to offer her some semblance of clarity. As she navigated the drive to the archives, she rifled through a mental checklist. Each document housed in the archives was no longer mere pages, they were pieces of a puzzle that could either build her career or shatter her hopes if misinterpreted. What if the revelations worked against her? The toxic laughter of Professor Thomas echoed in her mind, a sharp reminder that everything in academia came at a cost. Arriving at the archive building, she paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The musty scent of old paper greeted her, a comforting reminder of time's passage. As she approached the desk, hope wrestled with apprehension, uncertainty dancing at the edges of her resolve. The archivist greeted her with a warm smile, oblivious to the storm brewing within. "We found some interesting material related to your great-grandmother," he said, handing her a stack of aged papers. Each sheet felt like a key to a door she had long sought to open. "You might want to review these in a private study room." She nodded, biting her lip as she accepted the bundle. Inside, the four walls of the study room seemed to close in, amplifying her racing thoughts. What if these documents revealed a complicity in events she hadn't anticipated? What if her great-grandmother's actions were not as noble as the myth she had built in her mind? As she unfolded the first letter, the words washed over her, a familiar handwriting leaping out from the page. Emily traced the lines with her fingers, reading about the struggles her great-grandmother faced, her battles against oppressive regimes, and the cacophony of voices that opposed her. But as the letters unfolded, a darker narrative began to surface: alliances with figures who had questionable morals, the sacrifices made along the way that blurred the lines between right and wrong. Emily's pulse quickened. This was more than just a familial legacy, it was a complex tapestry of triumph and downfall. As her fingers flipped through document after document, details painted a multifaceted picture. The names of those once hailed as allies emerged alongside those termed as adversaries. Was her great-grandmother driven by ambition, or was it merely the harsh necessity of survival? The walls around her felt eerily constricting, urging her to make a decision. Margaret Atwood famously said, "It isn't what we don't know that gets us into trouble, it's what we know that ain't so." What if Emily's perception of her ancestor needed heavy re-evaluation? Could the truth, once uncovered, alienate her from her peers even further, not just professionally but personally? In the storm of her thoughts, Emily made a choice. This wouldn't just be a research project, it would demand her to wrestle with ethical dilemmas and confront the darker facets of history. She would present her findings honestly, but the risk was palpable. Her identity as a historian was about to undergo another transformation, one that could either affirm her standing or force her into isolation. Just as she began aligning her thoughts on how she would craft her presentation, her phone buzzed again. A message from Professor Thomas appeared on the screen: "Excited to see how you'll handle this. Should be a show, don't you think?" Frustration bubbled within her as she recognized the challenge in his words. This was more than just an academic debate, it felt like a duel of ideals. She would need to ready herself for the upcoming defense not only of her work but of herself. With resolute clarity, Emily prepared to dive deeper into her ancestors' story, aware that her next steps would not just shape her career but define her very essence as a historian. The battle ahead was brewing not just within the confines of academia, but within her own heart. What would happen when she revealed the truth? Would it fortify her connection to her lineage or entrench her in conflict? As the sun dipped lower, casting an urgent glow over her papers, Emily understood one thing clearly: she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant confronting the ghosts of her family's past. The real question lingered in her mind: could she handle what this truth would demand of her? The eyes of her colleagues, once filled with skepticism, would soon be framed instead with something altogether different: anticipation or condemnation. It was time for Emily to uncover not only her great-grandmother's past but also her own resolve. The moment had arrived to face more than just academic criticism, it was time to engage fully with the complexities of her legacy and her self-worth. The air in the study room grew thick with anticipation as Emily gathered her thoughts. She had spent the last hour poring over the documents, and their implications weighed heavily on her mind. Each discovery felt like a layer being peeled away from her great-grandmother's carefully crafted legacy. Emily's perception was now riddled with uncertainties, demanding a robust intellectual and emotional response. This was not what she had envisioned when she began her research. She had expected insights to glorify her ancestor, to present her as a figure of unyielding moral fortitude. What she found instead was a deeply human narrative, tangled and complex. Tension thrummed in her veins as she contemplated how to convey these revelations. Would her academic peers appreciate the nuanced reality of her ancestor's life, or would they dismiss it? The risk of being misunderstood flared in her mind. She had witnessed firsthand how scholars could twist narratives to serve their own purposes. Would her honesty lead to her downfall, or would it elevate the discourse? The line between courage and recklessness had never felt so perilously thin. Hours slipped away while she wrestled with her thoughts. Emily emerged from the isolation of her study room, seeking a fresh perspective. The hallway echoed with muted conversations and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee. She spotted a familiar figure, Sophia, her colleague and friend, discussing her own research in the adjoining corridor. This was the perfect moment to test her thoughts against an experienced historian's perspective. "Hey, Sophia." Emily beckoned, urgency layering her voice. As Sophia approached, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Here was someone with whom she could share the weight on her shoulders. "I need your opinion on something." They found a quiet corner, Emily's pulse racing as she unwrapped the intricate narrative she had uncovered. The words spilled out, each sentence heavier than the last. Would Sophia understand? Would she validate Emily's fears of the repercussions? Sophia frowned slightly, a serious dimension settling onto her features. "You're grappling with something substantial, Em. This kind of complexity doesn't merely make for good history, it's essential. But you need to think carefully about how you communicate this. Are you prepared for the backlash?" Emily nodded, but inside, doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if the truth alienates me from my peers? I am a historian, I want to inspire, not create barriers. Sophia's understanding gaze met hers. Isn't honesty a part of the legacy you want to carry forward? You're not just writing about your ancestors' choices, you're participating in a wider conversation about morality and history. Balancing those elements will be your strength. As they parted, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, the enormity of her task loomed larger, not just the decision of how to present the findings, but also the emotional turmoil and potential isolation that awaited her. Each resounding truth echoed loudly in her heart, compelling her to muster courage she had never needed before. Was she ready to stand tall against criticism, to give voice to her ancestors' flawed humanity? That evening, under the flicker of her desk lamp, Emily drafted an outline for her presentation. Complexity and context became her guiding theme, a reminder to herself of the intricacies she wished to explore. Yet, the specter of Professor Thomas South's derision hovered close. He had a way of preying on weaknesses, of twisting narratives to fit his agenda. The moment she finished her draft, an unexpected pang of fear struck her. Was she inviting confrontation by daring to present this multifaceted version of history? The notion sent ripples of anxiety coursing through her. Just as she was about to sink into self-doubt, her phone buzzed again. A notification from her academic group chat caught her gaze, looking forward to hearing everyone's presentations next week. Let's see who's brave enough to present the real truth. Emily's heart raced. Was it a challenge directed at her? The stakes were higher than ever. She was on the precipice of a decisive moment, one that could propel her career forward or plunge her into isolation. Her thoughts sharpened into a single resolve: she would not be silenced. With unwavering determination, she returned to her laptop, ready to embrace the labyrinth of truths and half-truths that lay ahead. But deep down, she felt the weight of an even grimmer question lurking: what consequences might she face once the truth was finally unearthed? The shadows of doubt and determination merged as she prepared for the confrontation that awaited. It was time to unveil the legacies not just of those who came before her, but of her own evolving self. Emily sat quietly in her dimly lit study, the draft of her presentation glowing on the screen before her. The intensity of her revelations surged within her like a storm, threatening to drown her in uncertainty yet fueling her resolve. She had come face to face with the depths of her ancestors' life, yet only now did she begin to grasp the massive weight of the narrative she was about to engage with. She replayed Sophia's words in her mind: "Isn't honesty a part of the legacy you want to carry forward?" The question throbbed in her thoughts, conflicting with a growing sense of vulnerability. For all her ambition, Emily had never considered herself a provocateur. The mere idea of questioning the established narratives left her quaking. Was she ready to challenge the entire framework of admiration surrounding her ancestor? The quiet of the room was punctuated only by the occasional rustle of paper as Emily reviewed notes, her heart racing with trepidation. What had struck her most about the documents was their complexity, their human frailty. As much as she was dedicated to shining a light on the past, revealing these truths felt like an attack. Would the truths she shared become weapons wielded against her? She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, a frantic whirl of thoughts battling for dominance. In that brief moment of stillness, she remembered something her supervisor had said in a moment of frustration: history isn't just about the facts, it's about the stories that emerge from the chaos. Was it time for her to embrace chaos? Driven by a sudden burst of clarity, Emily began to type again, feeling as if she were standing at an overwhelming precipice, a cliff overlooking an unknown abyss. Clarity washed over her as inspiration took root. Instead of just presenting information, she would craft a story that reflected both the light and darkness of her ancestor's life. The juxtaposition would offer a more profound understanding of human nature, flaws and all. As her fingers floated above the keyboard, she envisioned her audience, the colleagues who held sharp critiques, and the professors whose praise she had thirsted for. What would they expect? She winced, battling with memories of derision from a few encounters. But it was precisely those fears that ignited her determination. If she could weave her personal journey into this presentation, maybe she could connect with those same critics. Maybe they, too, could come to appreciate the balance she sought. Frantically, she composed sentences, torn between exhilaration and apprehension. Each phrase was a step deeper into the complexity that defined not only her ancestor but herself as well. To leave out the flaws is to deny the entirety of our humanity, she typed emphatically. As she neared the end of the draft, an unexpected realization set in. Emily had not only found her voice but had also unearthed fragments of her own story buried beneath the expectations of others. Her great-grandmother's legacy was more than a historical account, it was a shared narrative of struggle and resilience. The emotional weight felt lighter, almost liberating. However, the gnawing tension lingered like an unwelcome visitor. The looming presentation was less than a week away. Just then, her phone buzzed, breaking the solitude. Another group chat notification blazed across the screen, this time from a colleague who was notoriously critical. Let us see if anyone dares to show the real faults in our history next week. Who will take the plunge? Emily's heart raced again. That was her challenge. The stakes had never felt higher. With renewed vigor, she decided that it was time to break free from the cycle of worry and anticipation. She would meet these challenges head-on. All she needed was clarity, but it dawned on her that perhaps the moment of truth wasn't just about the presentation, it was a personal confrontation with her own insecurities. As she hit save on her draft, a question reverberated in her mind with an intensity she couldn't ignore: would she have the strength to share her findings and stand by her convictions when the time came to face her peers? Emily took a deep breath, committing herself to this fight. The moment was drawing nearer, and she sensed that the real confrontation was coming sooner than she thought. Would she rise to the occasion, or crumble beneath the weight of her own fears? With the hum of her laptop as the only companion in the stillness, Emily found herself unable to resume her flow. It was as if an invisible weight pinned her in place. Anxiety coiled around her thoughts, feeding on the pressures she felt. She could almost hear the whispers of doubt from her colleagues, imagining their raised eyebrows and skeptical glances. To combat the encroaching fear, she stood up abruptly, pacing her cramped study. Each step was an acknowledgement of her resolve. She couldn't allow herself to be paralyzed by critics who thrived on the status quo. Instead, she needed to transform her apprehension into a potent force of determination. Taking a deep breath, she focused on a small picture hanging on the wall, an image of her ancestor, the woman whose life she was about to unpack. "What would you want me to do?" Emily whispered, seeking guidance from the silent figure. Perhaps deep down, she knew the answer: authenticity. The legacy of her ancestor, with all its intricacies, begged to be told with honesty and depth. Why had she been so afraid of exposing the imperfections? The answer surged forward: imperfections tether people together, create dialogue, and reveal the complexity of human experience. With renewed conviction, Emily sank back into her chair. The words formed in her mind, picturing not just her ancestor as a historical figure but as a woman filled with desires, failures, and ambitions. She clenched her fists, brainstorming how to thread her own journey of self-discovery into the greater tapestry of history. She wouldn't be merely present, she would engage. Her struggle mirrored that of her ancestor. As the clock ticked louder, she had an epiphany. Sharing her own vulnerabilities could transform her narrative from one of distant admiration to relatable resonance. Maybe the audience needed to hear about her own insecurities, the grappling with self-doubt that echoed through generations. Engaged with the keyboard once more, her words poured forth like a dam breaking. The shadows of our past shape how we confront our present. I stand on the brink of discovery, embracing my uncertainties, reflecting on how they connect me to the woman I once idolized. Each line unfolded new layers of her revelation. The act of writing grew more potent, her own fears intermingled with those of the past, a shared human experience. This relationship to vulnerability felt liberating, bonding her narrative with that of her ancestor through a shared history of courage amid uncertainty. Emily was no longer merely a scholar critiquing the story, she began to see herself as a participant in a lineage of struggles. Yet, as exhilarating as the process was, an unsettling thought nagged at her: what would her audience think? Would they dismiss her efforts as too personal, or perhaps not scholarly enough? Would she be perceived as a provocateur or simply an amateur entangled in emotions? Encouraged by the raw authenticity emerging in her writing, Emily resolved to tackle this head-on. Perhaps the most important question she had to face was how to articulate her findings amidst the waves of judgment. Her phone buzzed again, a stark reminder that the moment was inevitable. A new message from Sophia lit her screen: ready for the presentation? Remember, it's your voice that matters most. As she read the words, a shiver of resolve coursed through her. The upcoming confrontation suited her to a T. This was not just about the past but a recalibration of her own identity. She would step into the spotlight as both the historian and the human struggling to clarify her place in a narrative bigger than herself. The moment was approaching quickly, and she felt the thrill of anticipation mixed with anxiety. But one thing was clear: she would not shy away from the challenge. She would unveil not just her ancestor's story, but her emerging self as well. With frantic incredulity fueling her thoughts, she wondered, in confronting her audience with her full self, would she also unlock the courage within them to embrace their imperfections? The looming presentation was not just a gateway into her past, but a chance to invite them all, including herself, to dare more deeply. Emily's heart raced as she glanced at the clock, the countdown to her presentation intensifying her emotions. With each tick, a blend of determination and fear channeled through her veins. The moment felt monumental. She had always been content to sit behind the pages, to observe rather than to speak. But today, she would be both the historian and the subject, revealing layers of herself that rarely saw the light of day. In the chaos of her thoughts, Emily recalled a lesson from her mentor: challenge is the crucible of growth. The phrase had riveted her back then, and it resonated now, vibrating within her like a drumbeat pushing her forward. This was not just another presentation, it was an opportunity to distill her experience into something meaningful, to intertwine the past with the present in a visceral narrative. She closed her laptop and flipped through her notes one last time, trying to quell the whirlwind of doubt swirling around her mind. Yet, as she skimmed the outlines of her story, the vulnerability she had so feared now felt like an anchor. Why had she ever believed that authenticity was a weakness? It was, instead, a bridge connecting her to her ancestors and, potentially, to her audience. What if they reacted differently than she feared? What if her honesty struck a chord? The thought invigorated her spirit, and she made a pact with herself: she would embrace whatever came next. She would stand tall, not just as Emily the scholar, but as Emily the person who grappled with insecurities, just like the women who came before her. The venue was a buzz of anticipation, filled with hushed conversations and rustling papers. The lights brightened overhead, accentuating the rows of expectant faces. Emily welcomed the anxiety. It was the same mix of energy that energized performers before a show, a sign that she was alive and engaged. She took a deep breath, stepping to the forefront of the room, feeling every gaze fixate on her. What if they perceived her narrative as too personal? The flicker of doubt arose, but she pushed it down. She was here to dismantle those very walls of criticism, to explore the human experience intertwined with historical analysis. As she began to speak, she felt the words spilling forth like water rejuvenating parched ground. I stand here before you, a historian and a descendant of women who fought against the odds, she began, her voice steadying with each phrase. Today, I want to share not just their stories, but mine. How their struggles echo in my thoughts, pushing me to confront self-doubt and vulnerability. The audience shifted in their seats, intrigued, perhaps surprised. Emily pressed on, unveiling not only the life of her ancestor but the shadows of her insecurities that mirrored those of generations past. With each revelation, she noticed the flickers of recognition in their eyes. She was drawing them in. Midway through her narrative, a voice wove through the crowd, slicing through her flow. But isn't it a stretch to make yourself part of this story? The challenge emanated from a well-dressed woman with a critical gaze, a knowing smile curling her lips. Emily felt the heat creeping into her cheeks, the weight of apprehension threatening to derail her momentum. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, the room holding its breath in anticipation. Then, in a moment of clarity, she remembered her commitment to be authentic. Do you really think it is a stretch? I'm here because the experiences of those who came before me live within me. Their fears and aspirations mold the decisions I make today. The tension shifted in the room, and the air grew electric. Emily's resolve solidified, she would not back down. The rest of the presentation loomed like an open field, inviting her to traverse it boldly. She spoke with fervor, weaving history with personal insight, igniting connections among her listeners. As the presentation concluded, applause erupted, but Emily's mind still raced. She had just scratched the surface of her potential and what this moment could herald. She glanced at Sophia in the crowd, who beamed with pride, but the lingering question remained, would she continue to explore how her narrative could shine light on both her history and her future? As the applause faded, Emily contemplated the path ahead, and it became clear, if she could confront one challenge today, what else awaited her? The answer was unsettling yet exhilarating. Emily stepped away from the podium, adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. Though the applause surrounded her like a warm blanket, the sharp voice of doubt from the audience replayed in her mind. She had pushed through the presentation, her connection to the past resonating with many, and yet that single query lingered like an unwanted shadow. Was it truly arrogant to weave her personal story into the historical fabric she so loved? Shaking off the self-doubt, she walked toward Sophia, who grabbed her into an exuberant hug. You were phenomenal, Em. Your narrative wow, just wow. You connected history to your own journey brilliantly. That woman's question was just a challenge, not a dismissal of your story. Emily nodded, though a flicker of uncertainty sizzled at the back of her mind. Was Sophia right, or had she overstepped, risking her credibility as a historian for the sake of personal embellishment? The moment she exited the venue, the air felt thicker, her surroundings transforming into a cacophony of sounds mixed with her heavy thoughts. As days followed, each potential moment for reflection became an internal battleground. The echoes of her presentation haunted her during late nights spent writing in solitude. What was the line between sharing personal struggles and maintaining professional integrity? She reopened her notes sporadically, unable to shake the thought, could it be that her vulnerabilities held strength, or were they merely avenues for criticism? While conducting research for her next project on historical women's narratives, Emily stumbled upon a diary of an earlier empress whose life echoed her own struggles in unexpected ways. This figure had faced criticism for her boldness and determination, just as Emily had during her presentation. But it was how that empress turned her hardships into a powerful narrative for her country that struck a chord in Emily's psyche. Motivated, Emily devoured the diary entries, recognizing shared insecurities, aspirations, and a similar desire for recognition. The strength of his words spoke of navigating societal expectations and also of embracing one's identity wholeheartedly. What if, she pondered, I could plumb those depths more earnestly, mining the resistance within my story to expand my voice? The following week, she decided to write a detailed proposal to share her findings at an upcoming scholarly conference, one that pushed against the traditional confines of historical interpretation. It felt risky. What if her peers dismissed her approach as too subjective? But could it also redefine how personal narratives could be woven into historical discourse? With each passing day, she wrestled with her aspirations while drafting the proposal. She spent hours rehearsing her concepts, not just limiting her work to the Empress's story but integrating her own as well. The weight of the proposal's significance slowly shifted. It represented more than an academic paper. It symbolized her commitment to transforming vulnerability into a source of empowerment. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, the submit button looming ahead like a monumental gateway. Everything felt amplified: the fear, the determination, the possibilities of reception. Finally, Emily clicked it, allowing her fears to feed her newfound courage rather than hinder it. In the moments that followed, exhilaration replaced apprehension. She realized she was no longer simply a passive observer in her own life. She was stepping into the arena. But with that boldness came a shuddering reality: if she was to engage at this deeper level, she would inevitably face harsher scrutiny. As she navigated this new realm of authenticity, a cryptic email arrived. The subject line read, "Invitation, challenge your narrative." Curiosity piqued, but sudden anxiety flooded her mind. What was being asked? What awaited her beyond this line of inquiry she had begun to tread? Emily's heart raced once more. The next phase of her journey had begun, and she was ready to confront it head-on. Emily's heart thrummed in her chest as she opened the email. The sharp subject line echoed in her mind, "Challenge your narrative." What challenge? What narrative? The implication sent a ripple of unease through her thoughts, while her fingers trembled above the mouse, stalling her from clicking to reveal the details. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she opened the email slowly, as though decoding some ancient script that might unveil insight into her journey. An invitation to participate in an exclusive workshop designed for historians interested in personal narratives. It promised a safe environment to explore the intersection of personal vulnerability and historical analysis. Yet, the word challenge danced in her mind, amplifying her suspicions. Real safety? Or a crucible where she might stand exposed? Intrigued, Emily sifted through the information. The workshop would feature not only seasoned historians but also psychologists specializing in personal storytelling. The goal was to help participants delve deeply into their own experiences, crafting personal narratives while simultaneously contextualizing them within the larger historical scope. To integrate one's own story into the larger dialogue of history while exposing oneself to critique was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could she dare to step into this arena? Authenticity demanded grappling with her fears rather than dismissing them, didn't it? As much as she yearned for validation, the prospect of raw exposure to her own insecurities was daunting. The open forums and group discussions listed in the agenda felt like an invitation to share wounds, to lift veils over vulnerabilities that she had worked so hard to cloak. Days turned into a whirlwind of emotions. With each moment spent in contemplation, Emily's resolve solidified. She longed for growth beyond the boundaries of her previous work. So she signed up, an act of defiance against her fears that whispered she wasn't worthy of such a challenge, or worse, that she might fail. In the weeks leading to the workshop, she immersed herself in preparation. Emily revisited the Empress's diary, finding deeper connections to her own story. She began journaling, allowing deeper threads of her past to surface: the moments of uncertainty, her smallest victories, the times she felt wholly inadequate. The act of writing became a catharsis, and slowly, the fragments of her history began to shape into the narrative of empowerment she never knew existed within her. As the workshop approached, however, a new anxiety surfaced: what if she wasn't ready? What if they criticized her approach, labeled her too subjective, or belittled her blend of history and personal experience? Would she indeed be prepared to share the complexities of her journey? Or would she find herself retreating, hiding behind academic facades? On the first day of the workshop, the curtain of anticipation lifted, revealing a room filled with diverse figures. Each participant seemed to carry a heavy cloak of their own stories, anxieties, and aspirations. As she observed them, a resolve seeped into Emily's core: she would lean into her discomfort. She would share her narrative not to prove herself but to ignite genuine connection. As the facilitator opened the floor for introductions, Emily felt an electric shift in the air. Would she rise to the challenge? Was she prepared to present herself authentically, risking exposure of her insecurities? The time had come to face her doubts, the expectations she'd built, and the weight of her discoveries. There was no going back now. Stepping into this circle of vulnerability could be the key to breaking down her internal walls. But what awaited her on the other side? As she took a deep breath, preparing to speak, her heart raced at the threshold of discovery. Stripping away her layers brought shivers of excitement and fear, hinting at revelations yet to come. What hidden truths had been waiting to unfold? With the journey ahead unfolding like a narrative she had yet to write, the fabric of Emily's life began to intertwine with new possibilities. How far was she willing to go, and what would this journey reveal about the historian she was destined to become? Emily stood before an audience of her peers and mentors, her heart pounding in rhythm with her breath. She had arrived at the workshop not just as a historian, but as a storyteller, ready to weave her personal experiences into the broader tapestry of history. The transformation that had blossomed over the past few months, the past few years, culminated in this moment of courageous vulnerability. As she introduced herself, she felt a tangible shift within. This was no ordinary presentation. This was her declaration, the moment she would fully commit to meeting her fears head-on. Today, I stand not just as a historian tracing the steps of my great-grandmother, but as a woman shaped by her legacy, flaws and all, she began. The room was silent, anticipation filling the air. With each word, Emily found her footing, embracing the power in vulnerability. She recalled her family's struggles, the whispered doubts from her colleagues, the moments that had tested her resolve. She spoke of how history was often dressed in grandeur, but her journey focused on the raw truths that lay beneath. The story of her great-grandmother was not just one of triumph, it was a narrative saturated with hardship, ambition, and complex choices. As she delved deeper, she integrated her own fears and insecurities, the moments when she felt she didn't belong in the academic sphere, when imposter syndrome had wrapped around her like a heavy cloak of despair. By unearthing her own vulnerabilities, she illuminated the human connection that binds all storytellers, making her presentation resonate beyond the confines of scholarly critique. Upon concluding, Emily felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't merely recounting history, she was unmasking the echoes of personal struggle that bordered on silence. The applause that followed felt like a resounding affirmation rather than an echo of mere politeness. It signified a collective acknowledgement, a recognition of the bravery in authenticity. Then came questions, not critiques, but bridges to conversation. Fellow historians sought to understand her perspective, engage with her narrative, and better comprehend the nuances she presented. Her willingness to be raw and honest had set the stage for a dialogue that celebrated complexity. That evening, Emily reflected on the day's events, marveling at the metamorphosis she felt within herself. No more did she wrestle with a sense of inadequacy or fear of exposure. She had proven to herself and her colleagues that her lineage was not a burden but a profound source of strength. Her resolve had crystallized around a singular belief, that authenticity within scholarship could pave the way for a richer understanding of history itself. In the days that followed, Emily committed herself to share her new approach more broadly. With each article she penned and each lecture delivered, she infused her voice more prominently into historical narratives, redefining not only her field of study but also her place within academia. This passionate integration and exploration of personal histories captivated her audience in ways she never imagined, leading to invitations to present at conferences and collaborate with fellow researchers eager to explore similar themes of identity intertwined with historical analysis. More importantly, she stood rooted in solid confidence, her expertise recognized when she was nominated for an academic fellowship honoring innovative approaches to history. Her career trajectory took an exhilarating leap, her standing now firmly established among the ranks of scholars who once overlooked her. This newfound recognition vindicated her belief in merging history with personal narrative, unlocking a paradigm shift in how personal stories could enrich our understanding of the past. As she gazed at her reflection in the rearview mirror while driving home from the conference one evening, a sense of buoyant pride welled up within her. Emily had ventured into the uncomfortable and emerged transformed, a powerful scholar intertwined with her rich lineage. Embracing every facet of herself had illuminated a path forward that felt both daunting and exhilarating. This was not just survival, it was success defined by authenticity. It was an achievement born from the intertwined stories of a historian and her lineage. And as she continued to forge this path, Emily realized that each layer she peeled back in her past served as a stepping stone into the future, a future she was now ready to embrace without hesitation. If you've been inspired by Emily's journey of self-discovery and courage, you need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and keep these motivating narratives alive. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Emily's journey toward authentic empowerment. And don't wait even one more second, share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness the power of personal overcoming stories.